Land of many waters with 6 races living together.
Globespan is a Guyanese dialogue moving towards the realization of one nation in one Guyana. It's a platform that offers an all-inclusive discussion, with the pros, the cons, the ones that is taken aside, and the ones that stand in the middle. Globespan believes agreeing and disagreeing are part of the nation's building. Globespan believes that every Guyanese voice is part of the nation's building. As we span the globe for voices from the diasporas, and those living home, we stand on our commitment that we are all Guyanese working towards one nation in one Guyana.
Coffee and Dr. Jagan, Bobby, she gave us our great sons. Rohan Kanhai, Coffee and Dr. Jagan.
As the world turns on its axis bringing changes, we as Guyanese must adopt to those changes for a better Guyana for all. Globespan stands on its axis with its belief that one nation, one Guyana, one destiny must include voices from all corners of Guyana.
Land of many waters with 6 races living together.
Thank you very much to our audience for tuning in tonight, and welcome to tonight's edition of Globespan. My name is Rusat Ramgopal. I'll be the moderator for tonight's discussion. Tonight's discussion is focused on the political awareness of the Guyanese diaspora and the effect on Guyana's development. We're proud to be joined by a very esteemed panel of guests. We have Mr. Colin Haynes, Mr. Albert Baldio, and Mr. Ravi Dev with us. Mr. Colin Haynes, many of you would have seen many times on this Globespan. He was a young leader of the AFC, and he's still involved, even though he's a member of the diaspora now, still involved in Guyanese politics. He's also very well established in the healthcare sector. We're glad to be joined by Mr. Albert Baldio. Those of you would know him. He had a successful legal career in Guyana, and over here was very involved in local politics in the New York area. Albert Baldio ran for New York City Council in 2005 as a Democratic candidate. In 2006, he was the Democratic nominee for New York State Senate, coming the closest that any Indo-Caribbean has come to winning a major elected office in New York, and he's still involved in politics here. He's still a district leader for the Democratic Party in the Richmond Hill area, where a lot of the Guyanese are populated, the Little Guyana area, as we all call it. And we also joined by Mr. Ravi Dev, who is a successful lawyer as well. And famously, we talk about the diaspora coming here. Mr. Ravi Dev was a member of the diaspora and went back to Guyana, forming the Roar Party, and I would call it also a movement of sorts, and which competed in the 1996 elections, 2001 elections. So you all would be very familiar with Mr. Ravi Dev as well. So thank you all to our esteemed panelists for joining us for tonight's discussion, which will be focused on the Guyanese diaspora. So there's a few things that we're going to address. I'll give our audience a broad overview of how the program will go. So we're going to discuss the political awareness or lack thereof in the Guyanese diaspora. The Guyanese diaspora is very large in New York City. It's the second largest immigrant group in Queens, for instance, yet it has never won elected office in Queens. There's a Guyanese diaspora in Brooklyn that is much more politically aware, I would argue, and has actually won elected office in Brooklyn. And we're going to discuss why that may be. Mr. Baldio has experience running in Queens. I myself also have experience running in Queens. I was the Republican nominee for New York City Council here in the recent elections. So we'll be talking about the apathy of the Guyanese diaspora in Queens, and also the focus of the Guyanese diaspora on issues back home and how the diaspora is treated in Guyana as well. And from that perspective, we're glad to have our panelists. We'll also pay tribute to very notable Guyanese figures who died recently, such as Justice Prem Prasad and the former permanent representative to the UN and longtime Foreign Minister Rudy Ansanali. And we'll also obviously touch on the Guyana-Venezuela issues and how a politically aware diaspora would actually be beneficial to Guyana in many ways. Because if you look at the needs of Guyana right now, I think an involved diaspora that could advocate for the American role to be more interested would be a beneficial thing. So we'll take perspectives from all of our panelists, but I'll just give you a chance to have some opening remarks. So I'll start with Mr. Colin Haynes first for brief opening remarks, and then we'll make our way around, and then I'll ask the first couple questions.
Yeah, thank you, Rusat. It's a pleasure to be on the show once more. Thank you to Devin. Thank you to Noir Singh for the technical work and for his vision of putting this together. I think the word diaspora is a very commonly used word. Recently, I was talking to some friends of mine. They actually asked me, what is the diaspora? And so because of that, I felt like it's important, for us to first define what a diaspora is. So essentially, it's just a spread of people. So people of the same ethnicities, like we're Guyanese. We're not in Guyana at the moment. Some of us are located like Bert in Queens, some of us located in Washington, D.C. area like me, some people in England, some in Canada, all over the world. So I think it's very important, even as we use these words, we understand we have a very dynamic and a very talented group of diaspora. I mean, think about we have the great Rudy Grant, a guy who invented his own genre of music, was part of the diaspora. I think he lives in Guyana now as well. We have people like entertainers who have even family members or parents of diaspora, such as Rihanna, Kirk Fitzpatrick. We have Baroness Amos, who was the first Black woman. I had the privilege of meeting her to serve in the British cabinet. She's now the Chancellor of Oxford University. So this is just a couple. I mean, to think of experts, like in college, I read books about regional security in the Caribbean from Dr. Ivla Griffith, who went on to become the Chancellor University. So I want to just take this opportunity to just highlight a lot of great things our diaspora has been doing. Many areas, science and technology, atomic, nuclear. Dr. Vincent Adams was in that field, did so well in it. We had sports athletes and so forth. Also, I'd like to take the opportunity to give our sympathy to the family, relative friends of Prem Prasad and Dr. Rudy Ensenali. I became familiar with Rudy Ensenali a short while because my background is international relations. And so I've met him once in DC at the OAS. We had a conference in the Caribbean, and we were just talking. At that time, I was a young, overzealous young man, and so he was able to give me some really good words of advice, and we talked generally about policy in the Latin America region. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Haynes. Mr. Baldio, your opening remarks, please.
Well, in defining the diaspora, and I always wonder why this word diaspora is so much like a sort of like a biological, cotton moving around and so on. But the diaspora is actually what defines Guyana, because the best and the brightest have left Guyana. And just recently, I'm wearing my Queen's College tie tonight, Rusat, on my fellow brothers Ravi and Mr. Haynes. But I can tell you, we had a meeting of 25 members who went to Queen's College, and all 25 of us became successful in one profession or another. What I'm trying to say is that the diaspora is the cream of the crop, but it's not always been given the respect that is due in Guyana. And sometimes when you go back, and I don't know if Ravi has had that kind of experience, where people tend to say, well, where you been when the revolution happened? So I used to ask them, what kind of revolution are you talking about? We fought a revolution for Guyana in Washington, D.C. when we couldn't get fair and free elections. Our voices were heard, but they could write up to Congress and to Washington, D.C., and to the White House. Then they begin to understand. And somebody said, well, oh, you left for greener pastures. I said, New York doesn't have green. Guyana has green forests. We don't have green pastures in the diaspora. People work 3 and 4 jobs, do back their studies, do back their certification, compete with the bravest and the brightest. And that's how they earn their spurs. So anybody who comes over into the diasporas in the UK or Canada or the United States has passed the test of life. They have to work hard. Nothing is ever given to them. They come into a society where you are an underdog, and then they break through these barriers. Some of people have worked 3 and 4 jobs. As an immigration attorney for many decades, I can tell you that the kind of people that have come through here, they've really, really worked hard and paved the way for others and made themselves into somebody, and that's very good. What I would like to see in this context is that the diaspora is given its due. The diaspora has done a lot. When the elections were stolen in Guyana, we did a lot of lobbying. We spoke right up to the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. about it, and he acted with credit to the Donald Trump's government. They did step in and step in very quickly, and I would say in a very definitive way to repel the forces that tried to hijack Guyana's democracy. So Guyana, the diaspora has always been the guardian of Guyana. It has always been the godfather, so to speak. It has kept its eye on Guyana, but it's only when something arises. Then you hear about the diaspora getting involved and what you're doing about this and what you're going to do here and what you're going to do that. And we have to do it, of course. But I believe that there should be more respect that is due to the diaspora, both in terms of what Colin said of our skills, our vocations, our patriotism, and our service to Guyana. And Guyana should pave the way if we're going to be one Guyana. Not that I'm looking for a job, but if you're going to be one Guyana, then you must be able to take down those barriers and bureaucracy, red tape. Open up these cabals, let a cabal be one Guyana, and have everybody have an equal stake based on their qualifications, based on their experience, based on their track record. They have a lot to offer, I can tell you this, in many, many fields, even diplomatic fields. And sometimes we don't always see the brightest that has been sent to these parts. There has come a time right now with this crisis with Venezuela, where I believe that, more can be done and we can have better representation at those levels. So in coming back to what you were asking about the political conscience of the diaspora, sometimes to our discredit over here, we have it backwards. We believe that a minister or prime minister coming over here or a head of state can pick up the phone and ask to get a child into a school or be able to fix a pothole or go to the highest levels of government, even with a Guyana issue, and call the White House or the State Department to make a complaint. But the diaspora also needs to be more active in where we are. They need to be more voter conscious. They need to be more involved in the politics that they have paid taxes towards to improve their status here. And I think that is where they have really dropped the ball. You and I, Rusat, we've been through this process. We know what it is. We have been we've seen the pain and the suffering. We've endured that, but we've come out fighting. You don't get much credit from anybody for that kind of sacrifice. But let me tell you, it is the biggest sacrifice one can undertake, and that is to run for office in a place where there's no PPP government, there's no PNC, there's no basic standard bearer. You have to build from the bottom. You have to carve a path that has never been trod before. You have to beat through a jungle that is not welcoming to you, and you have to take the arrows that can be leveled against you, and you have to withstand the cannons that are going to try to destroy you. Those who have tried to empower the diaspora and to raise the political consciousness have done the greatest service to the Guyanese inside, within, and without Guyana. And I make no bones about that because I've been through that. I've seen what it takes. Sometimes you wonder why you do it. And I'm sure the same thing happens to you, Rosat, as you think about your last election. But I can tell you this, lift your head up high. It is one of the most monumental things you can do. And as Franklin Roosevelt said, the man in the arena is the man who should be proud of having seen the dust and the blood and the sweat of that. You have to be physically inside there. It is easy to be on the outside, in an armchair most likely, and with a pen and a paper, write about these things. But unless you're in the dust and grime and in the pitfall of politics, in such a strange place, and not in a very unwelcoming place, I believe that a lot of kudos and a lot of thanks are due to people like that, and we can improve ourselves in the diaspora. And Guyana, in reciprocity, can also have its arms more open to welcoming the skills and talents and encourage folks. Not only when Guyana is in a bind, then you start to look for who can help us and who knows who and who knows what. Who's going to talk to this congressman, who's going to talk to that, or whatever. That should not be a time when we should start looking for representation. We should always have people in places and be one Guyana, inside and outside of Guyana, UK, Canada, America, all over the place. And that is how we can cover ourselves. And that is my opening remark on this topic.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vallier. And yes, you are correct that Teddy Roosevelt's speech, it says very clearly that it's not the critic who counts, it's the man in the arena. So thank you for reminding me of that. That is one of my all-time favorite speeches. And Mr. Ravi Dev, your opening remarks, please, and especially given your unique background, as we were saying, somebody who experienced both the diaspora and also going back to Guyana and how that felt.
My predecessors have said quite mouthfuls. So let me see what I can come with my perspective. As you said very clearly, I'm one of the early members of the diaspora out here in terms of the Indo-Caribbean diaspora. I came out in '72. And that in itself tells a particular tale. When I came out, I had heard of Guyanese, but they were all in Brooklyn. The friends who I had, and like most immigrants, somebody would receive you, somebody would put you up, and you get in. So I came off, not the boat actually, but came off the airplane and went over to Brooklyn, where some friends of mine were living on Ocean Avenue, right in Flatbush there. The point I want to make is this, that I discovered, having lived in Brooklyn from 72 to 79, that Guyanese have a rich history in the local politics. And this is something that is not often referred to. So we have a model that we can follow. Because in my first semester at Brooklyn College, in those days, you had to go to downtown Brooklyn at Livingston Street and do a semester there. And that's when over in Crown Heights, you were face to face now with all of the politicians who came out of Crown Heights. The first Assemblyman Baker, Guyanese, the first Congresswoman, the first Black Congresswoman, Shirley Chisholm, Guyanese father, a Bajan mother. And I could go on and on up to the present, where you have individuals from a Guyanese or Caribbean descent. So in that small section of Bedford Stuyvesant / Crown Heights in those days, they were all merged in those days. What happened? There's a wonderful book written by one Guyanese who rose out of it. I think it's called Brown Girl, Brown Stones. And she talks of living there. So when a lot of us are very proud of how we came out of Richmond Hill and we rebuilt Richmond Hill and we had block associations and we had real estate and we had lawyers and what have you, all of that has been done in Crown Heights before. The model is there. And they went on to achieve in America by becoming, not only in politics, but in all areas of life. They also emerged and become successful. So coming back to political consciousness, your political consciousness is shaped invariably by your environment. It has to be. One does not act in a vacuum. So that first early generation of Caribbean people, including Guyanese, who came out to Brooklyn from the 1920s and 1930s, they found themselves worked very hard, and their children, like Shirley Chisholm, who went to school in Barbados and came back to New York, were very high achievers. But she saw the need for political representation. But in those days, politics in New York was done by all the bosses who controlled it, and there wasn't a black face around. So her slogan is an interesting one, which I think, you two young men who are entering the political arena ought to remember. She said, and she announced very clearly, she was unbossed and unowned, right? She was her own woman with her own perspective. Secondly, she always referred to herself as a Bajan American. She never forgot her ethnic roots. I guess having gone to from a little girl at 5 back to Barbados, she identified more with Barbados and Guyana, but the concept holds. So I want to come to this point now, that when we speak of the Guyanese diaspora, we cannot look through a rose-tinted lens. From Brooklyn, I then moved over to Jersey, the suburbs. I was working in mid-Manhattan and was right across the Hudson there. But then the Indian community started coming to Queens. We can have some historian look into it. My uncle bought one of the first homes in Richmond Hill in 1977, right on Liberty Avenue. So I want to say that, like Kipling wrote about the whites and the Indians, that in New York here, when the African Guyanese came out, they went to Brooklyn. When the Indian in the West, and when the Indians came out, they went to Queens in the East. And it was seemed that never the twain shall meet, like Kipling said. And this is part, we have to address it frontally if you're going to talk about a Guyanese diaspora. We can't paper it over. Why is that schism here? How do we work to get it resolved or addressed at least? Because in my estimation, it's reflective and refractive of the reality that they left Guyana with. So with that, my opening statement, I think we should be able to get into that and not gloss over it.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Devin. There are aspects of that I was addressing earlier that I wanted to develop on, and Mr. Haynes had touched upon it as well, and as well as Mr. Baldio. So if you look at that Guyanese diaspora, there's the Brooklyn diaspora, and there's also the Queens diaspora. And as you were touching on, the Brooklyn diaspora, which is, let's just say, in its modern day, it's more Afro-Guyanese. And if you look at the successful political aspect there's more people of Afro-Guyanese descent. They made it very far at one point. If you look at, you mentioned Shirley Chisholm, even John Sampson and others, they actually achieved more political success than the Indo-Guyanese diaspora in Queens. And I wanted us to address, reasons why we think that may be. Mr. Haynes was talking earlier about how successful the diaspora has been across the different sectors and even across the world. You mentioned in the UK, you've had members of parliament of Guyanese descent in the UK. Even the shadow, I believe he's currently the shadow foreign secretary, David Lammy, is of Afro-Guyanese background. One of the leading figures in opposing Brexit was the daughter of Do Not Sing, Gina Miller. So you've had Guyanese go abroad and be part of a diaspora and still be very politically active. But in the US, even though we have such a large diaspora here, it seems that for some reason in Queens in particular, that Indo-Guyanese diaspora in Queens, they are just not politically engaged. And there are many reasons that we could go into it. And Mr. Baldio and I, both from our experiences, can talk that this is something that has occurred across different eras, across generations, across party lines. They just don't come out and vote. The fact of the matter is, if you look at the numbers, the same amount of people who came out in 2005 to vote for Apple Baldio for city council are the same amount of people who came out in 2023 to vote for Rusat Ramgopal for city council. And it's not that we don't have the numbers. We have literally about 100,000 Guyanese living in Queens, in this greater Richmond Hill area, but they just don't come out and vote. The fact is, in my election, more than 95% of them just didn't come out. So it's not that they're not there, they just don't come out. And Mr. Baldi could speak as well, that I believe I've heard him speak about that 2006 race, that the votes were there, but they were just, in the restaurants and on Liberty Avenue. They didn't come out and vote. So I want us to touch upon why we believe that may be. There may be cultural reasons why that population just doesn't come out, and it has to be talked about. If you don't have the discussion, you're never going to address it. So I'll even read, Dr. Tara Singh, who is a noted academic. He wrote a bit about the recent elections, and there's a quotation that I want to read, which relates to what we were saying just now. So Dr. Tara Singh wrote about the 2023 elections here. He wrote about the Guyanese diaspora in Queens, that their voter turnout rate was low. Despite pleas to voters, they couldn't be bothered. The sad part is, despite the Guyanese, particularly Indo-Guyanese numeric strength in the greater Richmond Hill area, we are yet to elect a city council member or a New York State Assembly or Senate member. The furthest we have gone is to elect Democratic district leaders. In Brooklyn, the Guyanese, particularly Afro-Guyanese, have been able to elect Guyanese to the New York State Assembly and State Senate. Their political consciousness relative to city and state politics is much greater than Guyanese, particularly Indo-Guyanese living in Queens. Lack of adequate political consciousness plus internal disagreements have resulted in political apathy amongst Guyanese in Queens. So we need to talk about why there is that apathy, how it can be addressed. And Devin, if you could pull up that the clip of the article that I sent you earlier. This is something that has been existing for years. So this is a clip from a New York Times article that was written since the mid-1990s. And in that article, they say, the viewers will see it on their screen, it says here, and this may be one reason for why they're not politically engaged here, speaking about the Guyanese in Queens, it says, since they began arriving in southwestern Queens 3 decades ago, immigrants from Guyana have worked hard for an economic foothold, but they have devoted little effort to local politics, preferring to keep track of politics back home. And this is something that I think our committee has to address, because you can address both your politics back home and your politics here. Many diasporas are involved both in their politics back home as well as their politics here. But for some reason, the Indo-Caribbean community in Queens, they're focused on the politics back home, but they're not focused on the politics here. One thing I used to say while campaigning is that the Guyanese living in Queens are more concerned about local government elections in Guyana than local government elections right where they're living, in New York. And the article by the New York Times goes on to address what's the repercussions of it. That even though they have over 100,000 in the Richmond Hill Ozone Park area, that they complain that they don't have social programs and they don't get the benefits of political representation, because the elected officials that go in aren't elected by them, they're elected by other bases, and they put the benefits, the social programs, where their power structure is, where their base is. And they don't put it where the Guyanese are, because the Guyanese don't come out and vote. And there has to, at some point, there has to be a realization that you're not getting the proper services because you don't go vote. You need to go vote to get those services. And we have to, why is it, for example, Mr. Dev talked just now about the Guyanese in Brooklyn. The Guyanese in Brooklyn really connected that well since decades ago. You talk since the 70s, Shirley Chisholm was in there. They knew they have to get in and vote, get somebody in office for them, and then they'll be represented. And so I spoken a bit just now. I could go on about the point, but I don't want to belabor, go on too long. So, Mr. Baldry, what do you have to say about that aspect, the apathy of the Indo-Caribbean diaspora in Queens?
Well, it's a very interesting point. I believe the genesis of this lies going back to the dark days in the 1970s and 80s, when a lot of Guyanese left their home country in search of a better life because of political persecution. And they felt that their horses in London voted, and the dead people, and the votes were stolen, and the ballot boxes were hijacked by the GDF and so forth. So they felt that the regime that sent them packing, they always felt that their votes didn't count. And it told me that, Mr. Ballieu, politics is a very dirty business. Our votes never counted. They will never count. We love to vote for you, but we don't have faith in the system. That's the first big mistake, because they're coming to a different system in America where the votes are counted. There may be shenanigans also, as I experienced, but not to the level of wholesale thievery and fraud as happened in Guyana in those years. So the historical antecedents have caused them to be very skeptical and negative of the system of voting. That, however, is not an excuse, because as clear as night is, as night and day are, they have seen the difference. How Americans, like the folks who talked about, how Obama was elected, how people have come from way out and be elected in America. So there must be something with this system that is fair and can allow you to elevate and hold office. Secondly, I believe that there have also been, to their discredit, a lack of consciousness for political representation. They look to political representation as something that they don't need. They feel that this is a money-grabbing situation. If you got money, you got assets, you got the home, you live the American dream, you got your Benz. It is only when they come in to take that Benz from you, and they come to take that house from you with higher property taxes, and saying that the basement is illegal and hence the attic is illegal, and therefore we will violate your housing rights, and we will foreclose on you, and we'll fine you for basements, or they're going to ticket you. Or it's happened in my case, coming back to the 2005 case when I ran against Sheriff Maltese, who was there 30 years. Nobody ever challenged him. White Italian, he was so embedded for 30 years, he was the chair of the Republican Party. Now, he came out with a law to say that he was going to legalize racial profiling, because 9/11, they began to say, well, these brown people, paint them all with a broad brush, broad brush. And he came up with this term, swarty. So swarty means that all brown people, or people who are not white, could have been legally profiled if I had not stepped up and ran against him, because he drafted the legislation and it was about to pass. And I said, no, I'm going to come in and challenge this man on this ground alone, because it meant that we and our children will grow up as second-class citizens. Thankfully, I was able to get very close to him to the point of defeating him. And that he became history and that legislation, thankfully, because of its relation to him, never got another sponsor, and because of the great things we did. Now, Rusa, this is an example of how political activism can save your home from foreclosures, can save you from being a legalized second-class citizen in a great country like America, as Maltese had planned, to make that the law of New York State, that a person who's not white could legally be a second-class citizen, and therefore a person who could be stopped and frisked, taken out of his car, when the white driver will go ahead of him, or come here, we need you because you need it for questioning. You look like a terrorist. These are the kinds of things that affected them. Or in the basement, when they hired buses, we hired buses, and the buses were filled. They went down to City Hall to oppose this basement bill because their financial interests were targeted. Their economic livelihood was at stake because the city was going to foreclose or cause very significant harms to their basements. And the fourth issue I've found is that there are many petty leaders. Most of them, look, as a lawyer and as a district leader, I have had to tussle with many so-called leaders in this community who always want to have the final say, who are the armchair politicians and leaders who would dictate to these people as to how our folks, how life should be and what they should do. They will never defer to the experience of somebody more with a with the academic experience or someone who's been through politics. They would prefer to go to someone in these organizations and take counsel for them. So unless you have the mutual respect, that we will always be in this situation. And the fifth and the most important part I want to make is what happened in my 2004 campaign. When I ran, I was the first candidate. I went to Trevor Ryan, who had run before, and I told him I wanted to run. Would you be running? Because if you're running, I would not run. Trevor said, no, you will not run. When I declared my candidacy, there was people actively soliciting other ethno-centered candidates like myself, Indo-Caribbean candidates. And they began to recruit candidates to divide the vote because they didn't want one person to win that felt that I may have been a formidable candidate. And therefore, if he become that, they began to see politics as the dirty, foolish, thuggery way of Guyana, where there's this kind of mentality that if he gets in, oh, he's not going to help us on this and that or whatever, or he arrogant or whatever. It's the mindset that came to bother us. And that broke this community because the antecedents of that meant that from now, those scars of 2004 have still persisted in this community. And I'm not saying that's a major reason because I think with time that would have healed, but that was a kind of mentality. And thankfully, Rusat, when you ran as, and rightly so, as the most qualified candidate. You got the nomination. You're the first person to have gotten the Republican nomination. I salute you on that. I compliment you. And I think that is how it should be. When Joe Mizir and all this and Danny Bagwell ran, they ran on, and funny enough, the Republican line, you never get these challenges. There's always a mutual respect and strategy with Republicans. But with Democrats, they eat their own. So you have enough problems getting the nomination from the party chairman, who's not going to look kindly to an immigrant coming into his thing, and they have all these people whose parents were there before in the party. We're not going to get the nod. We have to win it. We have to beat them out of system. We have to actually do miracles to win. So here again, we have the lack of the Democratic Party embracing new blood into the party and looking out for those who were in the back door or who were in the back rooms, whose father was who was part of the dynasty. And those dynasties still subsist. There are many of them, and we talked about them the other day, and if you want, I can name them. These dynasties controlled politics in Queens, and it's just nothing different from the smoke-filled back rooms where they make all the rules and choose the candidates and keep the parties like this. And Rusat, you're right. This is the problem we've had, and this is the problem I see of why we have not. And perhaps it's just laziness, apathy, and something that they need to change. You need to change that. And if any of them are looking, I compliment those who have voted. You've done the right thing. You've won a civic prize. You've done your duty. But those who have not voted and think that, you're going to get, your lives are going to be better, or some other politician from some other part of the world going to come here and fight for you in Queens, then you've got another story to tell. Because look at Brooklyn. They have representation there from Congress people to city council. Guyanese, Jamaicans, Trinidadians. We're the only people. We are the only people, Guyanese, who do not have, I am a district leader, yes, but that is not as high as we can go. We can become Congress people, we can become state senators, as I almost became, we can become assembly members, or we can become city council members, as you tried to become, Rusat, and you should have been if they'd given you a fair shake. That is a situation that we need to confront. That is where we need to start and say, we need to elect somebody, so when that problems come, that even if this problem happens in Guyana, you're going to know to go to someone to go to the White House and ask them to get help, and not jump around in Guyana And we can complement those efforts very solidly. As Ravi will know, we can go there as we did in democracy to bring democracy in Guyana over the years. You have had people in the diaspora who have done that and who have really worked hard and have brought democracy to Guyana. So don't let ever denigrate the diaspora or deny them their due. It's a rich legacy, but unfortunately, it has not translated into political power or into a voting base that it ought to be. And that is a crying shame.
Thank you very much, Mr. Valli, for that. And there are a few things that you said that I want to touch on. And I'll begin by saying, we have one of the largest ethnic groups here in Queens. And the sad thing is that they haven't become, say, more involved over the last 20 years. You look at a lot of ethnic groups across, American political history. The Hispanics and Blacks, for instance, have gotten more involved over the recent decades. But in New York, the Indo-Caribbean community is about just stagnant. The same level of involvement they had in 2005 when you ran in 2006 is the same level of involvement they have now. They haven't grown their level of involvement, and that's why we're still stuck at the same place, and we're complaining about the same issues that we face. And when preparing for this show, there's something that I think about a lot, as I run, and we talk about, growth of communities. So if you think about, in American political history, you look at the African American community. When Jesse Jackson ran in the 1980s, right? Before that, you didn't have a serious contender who was a minority who ran, but he gave that image that, a minority could run and be a serious contender and do this. And I often say that without him doing that then, you wouldn't have had Obama later, right? There was a saying that when Obama won, somebody said, Martin dreamed so Jesse could run, Jesse ran so Obama could fly, right? And it was something along those lines. And so, but when you look back at Jesse Jackson's rhetoric at that time, there were many things that remind me of what we face now in this community. You spoke about how you may have qualified candidates, yet people just want to criticize. So Jesse Jackson once said that don't complain about what you don't have, use what you got. And I think that there's something about the Guyanese, especially in Queens, that you'll have somebody right in front of them running, and they'll say, "Oh no, I don't want him." They want to wait for this perfect person to appear right before them. If Jesus Christ could appear right before them, and I bet you if Jesus Christ appeared, they'll still find something wrong. Yes. They'll always, it's the old crabs in a barrel mentality. Rather than work with what you have, just bring down what they see in front of them instead of letting us rise together as a community. And that's where you have a fractured community, as Tara Singh was saying there. You have a very divided community, and Jesse Jackson talked about that as well. He had this speech called the David and Goliath speech, where he said that, because he was opposing Reagan at the time, even though as a Republican, Reagan, someone I admire. I admire Jesse Jackson's rhetoric as well. Jesse Jackson was saying that Reagan was winning by the margin of our fractured coalition, by the margin of our despair. And he was pointing out how Reagan was winning states by, he said, okay, Reagan won New York by 800,000 votes, but there were 900,000 Blacks who just didn't vote. And if you look at our community, every race that we've lost, whether it's those races we talked about in the 2000s or the race even that happened just now, we lose it by the margin of our community's despair and disaffection and apathy, and the margin of our fractured coalition, the same way that Jesse Jackson was talking about that community then. Because, again, we have the numbers. We are the largest ethnic group here, but we just don't turn out to vote. So when 95% of us just don't vote, we're losing by the margin of our despair. We're losing by the margin of our fractured coalition. And the reason Jesse Jackson mentioned David and Goliath there was he said, little David was challenged Goliath. Nobody wanted to challenge Goliath. Everybody was afraid of Goliath. In the same way, individuals like yourself when you ran against Surfin Maltese, who was a big Senate leader at the time, was the leader of the Republicans in the New York State Senate. So that was like a David and Goliath thing. When I ran against a very powerful Democrat incumbent. It's a David and Goliath story. But what Jesse Jackson was saying is that David had a slingshot and he had the stones and he took down Goliath. But unfortunately, when Jesse Jackson ran, he said the stones just lied around, the rocks just lied around. And that's the same thing that this community faces. We have 100,000 Guyanese here, but they end up, and when the time comes, just being rocks lying around instead of working together like David with that slingshot and taking down Goliath. So that's the point that I think we need to wake up to, that, we can take down that Goliath. We could do it. We talk about the Brooklyn model. They did it in Brooklyn. It wasn't easy what Shirley Chisholm did or the others who came afterwards, but they did it, and there's no reason that we can't do it either. But there's there's some other aspects of that I want to discuss. And Mr. Baldu said that but this what in particular Guyanese experience, fraudulent elections and things like that has shaped their mind, and even 50 something years later, that's why they still have that attitude towards politics and voting. But the cultural experience is you can't ignore that as a factor in why certain communities vote and certain communities don't vote. And I would just say in my experience in politics, I admire how the Afro-Caribbean and Afro-American and African-American community are dedicated towards voting. And I think that they know, like, it's a connection that they make, and they make it very well, and I admire them for making it, that because of their historic suffering, that is why they need to go out and vote. And I think that the Indo-Caribbeans, either they don't make that connection, or they just say that they just compartmentalize that suffering was because of, in their minds, Burnham or whatever, and then they only focus on that, and then they don't focus on that's why you need to have political power so you don't end up being at the wrong end of the suffering. But so Mr. Haynes, could you speak to what we've been talking about just now, and also in your own experience, do you see a sort of a cultural awareness that maybe Afro-Caribbeans have or African Americans have that we can learn from, that others just haven't made that connection yet, but they admirably have?
Yeah, well, I'm actually I'm very because in Guyana we have an issue where the Afro-Guyanese turnout is very low. I mean, the PNC is just pulling about 70% of their constituents in elections. But then when it comes to diaspora, they're actually coming out, they're actually engaging. And then, the Indo-Guyanese, they're the more dominant, they come out and vote. And I'm talking in Guyana context here. And then to see that there's that flip, in Richmond Hill, where, I know many friends, and I've seen, I've been to Richmond Hill many times. I think it's a very resilient community, very great community, but it's very disappointing that, both Albert and you guys, it's very difficult. And I know that you would have probably strategized, put in a lot of effort into, trying to get people out to vote, but somehow it doesn't happen. So I think that for that case, I think people need to understand that all politics are local. Every time I talk to people, they tell me they don't want to get involved in politics. I say, well, then you won't be alive. I mean, politics is everything. Politics actually comes from the Greek word politik, which means to be civilized. So politics, democracy, everything comes from the Greeks, right? And so every day is politics. You spend money, that's politics. Money is being printed by the government. There is fiscal policies. It goes straight up the chain. When you don't buy, the stock market goes down and up. When you buy, it goes up as well. Even when you pass away, there's politics too. Where to put you, where to spend. So politics is, I think we have to, there's somewhat supposed to be a change in the thinking that politics of itself, it's not a bad thing. Politics is reason why people run is to change society, to make things better, to improve livelihood. Now, the problem is being in political games for power. That has really been the issue. Political games that leaders play and put people at risk. That is where the problems are. I think from looking at Brooklyn, you would see that there are so many groups they organize. I'm sure that they do it. I'm just telling you because I also, been privy to some of those groups and some of those people. I can see they're very organized, they're very resilient. They come out, they do a lot of fundraising. And you know what? Let me say this to both you and Albert. Maybe it is time for Queens and Brooklyn to finally cross that bridge. I think there should be probably this massive march where both of you guys, like the Brooklyners, come across the Brooklyn Bridge or somewhere, and you guys meet together and a sense of unity. But also, I think it's important that you know, Brooklyn and Queens, they can share examples, share information, see what's working over in Brooklyn. I know there has been a long, and this is not a reminiscence of anything in the United States. It's mostly about Guyana, where you know, Brooklyn has always been the Afro-Guyanese, and Queens has been the Indo-Guyanese, and somewhat there's this tension about, you know, coming together. But I think at the end of the day, we have to realize that we're all Guyanese. You know, when they're looking at us in the United States, and I tell some of my friends, you know, they're not looking at us at Indo or Afro. We're all being looked at the same, you know. Myself, all of our hair is dark. And so we're all being categorized here as minorities. And so we're all one. And so I think that there's this time right now where we have to come together. We have to find commonalities. We have to work together. We have to strategize together. And, you know, talk to your friends in Brooklyn. Find out, what are they doing? Why is it that Brooklyn is pulling out, is able to pull out African, the Afro Guyanese, and why in Queens, which I think is a bigger diaspora than Brooklyn is, it's the home of Guyana, it's little Guyana. Why are we getting these challenges? Sort of the resources are there more than there is in Brooklyn. There's many more business communities and so forth. But also I would like to mention that some of this, we have to understand the context. Part of the context that we've sort of had is, you know, racial divide, segregation, discrimination in the diaspora. I think, Albert, you covered some of that. You know, there's generalizations too about us as a people. You know, when I travel around, one of the biggest challenges I have with people is trying to understand that I'm from Guyana and not Ghana, because there is these, you know, generalizations that we have, both about minorities and people from other countries. You know, as laughable it is, I've had people ask me if we drive cars in Guyana, and so many different things. I mean, you wouldn't believe, I'm sure that you guys probably would have all had those challenges, but I think that the time has come for us to really, as a diaspora, talk about, you know, what is our expectations, and, you know, what do we really want to not make out of just contributing to Guyana, but contributing to where we live and grow right now.
After Ravi, I want to address that issue.
Yeah, I'll get back to you after Mr. Deb. Yeah. Thank you very much, Mr. Haynes. Mr. Deb, I wonder what you have to say about this. And in addition to what Mr. Haynes said just now about, you use that phrase about not interested. You know, there's a lot of people in I see, especially in the Indo-Caribbean community, who just say, "Oh no, not interested in politics, not interested in that." And to what Mr. Baldi was saying, that, you know, they do have this impression of you know, politics is this nasty thing. And what Mr. Haynes said just now, that phrase "not interested," I experienced that a lot in the community, especially one place in particular where I remember experiencing it, and I have to point out to them why it's important to be interested. I would often, you know, go to temples and mosques and churches while campaigning, and especially in the Guyanese community in Queens, you'd say them say, "Oh no, we're not interested. We don't want to get involved in those stuff." And what I point out to them is, if you look at, I've never seen Reverend Al Sharpton say he was not interested in getting involved in a political campaign, because the African American community in New York has realized that it's important to get interested, even from the bully pulpit of the preacher's pulpit, just so that you could get your congregation out and go vote. You know, they have souls to the polls. The Black churches are one of the biggest institutions when it comes to New York voting. So, and that's why their community gets out, they vote, and, you know, they get the benefit of voting. Whereas, you know, the Indo-Caribbeans in Queens, they say, no, they're not interested. They don't want to get on vote, but then they want to complain afterwards about, you know, we're not getting this and that and whatever. So I was wondering, you know, what your opinion is on the perspective shared so far, and whether you think, you know, these cultural issues that we talked about, and also what I mentioned from the New York Times article about members of the diaspora being more concerned about Guyana politics than where they are right now. Again, you would have an interesting perspective on that, being somebody who was in the diaspora and then went back to Guyana and was involved in politics in Guyana there.
Well, I am a bit surprised that there's so much beating up on the community for not participating by two individuals who want to be leaders. If the people are apathetic, you have to understand the people you wish to mobilize, and I use the word mobilize. And to the extent you have been unable to mobilize them, that is your failure, not theirs. You're the guys who want to get elected. I want to be very blunt about that. My generation, who came in the 60s and 70s, we were fighting a dictatorship, and we went into the streets. We went to 14th Street, and we would stand at the subways where Guyanese would come out of the trains, and you would hand them leaflets. We would stand on Liberty Avenue. It was just beginning to be formed. My uncle had a house in Liberty Avenue at 130th. So the point is, you have to be creative. We would write out petitions and then stand next to the mailboxes in those days, have people sign them there, and you drop them into the mailbox of the congressmen. And that is how we mobilized for, and at that point it was politics in Guyana, but we want to say how you did it. You have to understand your people. They came as immigrants, and we're talking about culture. Afro-Guyanese came to New York as part of a trend from the Caribbean that had started from the West Indies. So when they came into Brooklyn, there was already individuals there from the turn of the century. I'm talking the 20th century there. So they fell into that. So when Chisholm's dad, right, I think he was a St. Hill from Guyana, when he came and worked in a factory, and her mom, the Bajan lady, worked as a seamstress. They worked very hard, but Shirley, having gone to Brooklyn College like myself, being exposed to political theory and what it implies, she did early childhood care and education, saw that the lack of those services in Brooklyn, the lack of Black people. So having identified the need in the community that is needed, she mobilized. She went on some very unique programs of door-to-door and explained to them, how come we don't have any Black faces on those making the decisions? She was one of the first to actually have, in that Crown Heights, Bed-Stuy area, to actually have names in neighborhoods. So let us take the ones in Queens, where I'm used to. I used to live in New Jersey, in Teaneck, right across the George Washington Bridge. But I would come every weekend into Queens, and we would try to mobilize. We formed something called the Caribbean American Resource Center, because our people were not aware of the services that are open to them. So you would educate them to the extent that if you were to now organize yourself and have your representatives, not only can you have these particular services, you'll be able to have ones that are more directed towards you. Shirley Chisholm in Congress, she was the one who came up with the WIC program, Women, Infants, and Children, to get food, which became an American institution because that was the need in Brooklyn. And she always credited that suggestion from a Jewish individual. The Lubavitch, the Hasidic Jews lived in that part of Williamsburg, Bed-Stuy, and she formed that coalition with the Jew. We have to do the same thing here. I'm suggesting to you, both young men, that you have a community, their culture gears them more towards economic advancement. They are immigrants. Shirley's dad, they fell into a system that was already there where they began to identify as African Americans. There was a conduit for them. Somebody that looked like them was doing this mobilization, was getting, like I said, Baker from 1927 or so got elected, the first New York Assemblyman, Guyanese, right? So the point is that she had a model. In those days, you were talking of as early as where blacks were voting Republican. Blacks weren't voting Democrat. So there's that shift. So Roussat, for example, you can see that Indian Guyanese have conservative values, family values, traditional Republican values. It is up to your creativity to go to that constituency in ways that you can be inventive and convince them, why do humans act? All of us, I'm a realist, all of us act in accordance to our own interests. So if you can get to those individuals and find the means to show them that it's in their interest, like Albert talked about the basement, that's not something to scoff about, that is their interest. You can't belittle it. That is their interest. Whatever their interests are at, that is where they're at. You get me? When I came in 72, Shirley had just formed the Black Caucus in 71. You understand? Because they were beginning to see that these are systemic conditions. In New York, the two of you need to work on that. Have you canvassed door to door in Guyana? I walk every day. I'm in New York for a while. I walk 40 blocks. And I'm in Richmond Hill, and I take a different path every single day. Even today, that was as cold as, I can't say cold as hell, you know, but it was very cold. But I walk 40 blocks, and I look at these blocks, and you can say, why can't we canvass these blocks? House to house canvassing. So to come back to it,
I want to fill in there.
Yeah, I just want Mr. Dave to finish his point, and then
I just want to respond to that.
And I hope there's somebody keeping count on the minutes here. The point is, I'm saying two things. One, there's that knocking your constituency, putting them down, scoffing at them is not going to get you anywhere as a politician. All right. The second one I want to say is that for Albert to talk that the best and the brightest Guyanese have come out here in the diaspora is very, very insultive to the Guyanese, and is the major reason why people in Guyana resent the diaspora. You can't go and tell people in Guyana that you are somehow better than them. What makes you better than them? What makes you better than them? Because you were able to enjoy what others fought for you in America? Why didn't you fight for it back there? I left a corporate job in Guyana, in America. I own a Seatown supermarket in the Bronx. I own a building on Jamaica Avenue there. It's all kinds of investments and all that. I left all of that and went back to Guyana, where nobody said you could take votes from the PPP. And in our first run, Roussat only ran in 2001, one and only time, right? We won a seat. Unheard of to take it by definitely, because we found out what were the interests of the people. They were interested in the security, and the PPP was avoiding that security aspect. So I say this not in any way, I just want to say this is my observation as an old head, so to speak, that has been through this both in New York and in Guyana. Thank you.
Well, yes, I take it in good faith, Mr. Dev, but I wanted to throw some, to shed some light on what you're saying. I was not knocking the people on those issues. Those are the issues we fought for. Those are the issues that are germane to our campaign: racial profiling, basement issue, legalizing basements as they do for the Jews in Borough Park, quota system, have a fair system of ticketing in Richmond Hill as you do in Richmond Hill and South Ozone Park. But let me tell you, I don't think you really researched where I've ran. When I ran for the state Senate, it was half the size of Guyana. It was not like this village block or this, what you call this, there's this block association that you may have been involved in. This was a constituency as large as Guyana that I ran for, where Jews and Afro-Americans and Italians all came out and voted for me over our own people. So the point that Roussat is making, that there's other people, we are electable, other people vote for us. And I don't know if you have any experience of running for office over here. I believe you went to the Guyana, you ran for office, and I think you got, what was it, 1%, 2% of the vote? Over here, we have to cross the threshold, and we don't have a place to build on. We don't have, like, we're going to go to Cherry Jagan Party, who I have right here and proudly admire. We had to build from nothing, Mr. Dev. There was no roadmap.
Man, here you're whining again, man.
Or anybody else. I didn't disturb
you're whining again.
So for
These are your challenges, and face your challenges.
Okay, I think as a moderator, you guys got to break it up.
The wrong narrative.
Either of you right now.
Come on.
We do not beat up on our constituents. They would not have elected me to be a district leader. So I want to correct that misnomer that you have somehow broadcast. I was elected twice, the only Guyanese to be elected twice in Richmond Hill. And secondly, I'm the only person who ran for a seat as large. Hold on.
You antagonize them more. It's not going to help anything. So I think we got to move on from this for the sake of the discussion.
And got 49.5% of the votes. So therefore, you have to give Jack his jacket.
Okay, you guys can't talk over each other. I mean, as simple as that.
And allow you, but Mr. Dev, you give me a chance because you were speaking all the time. Okay, you have to allow me,
Mr. Dev. We're going to move on.
You made some very serious statements, Ravi. You made some very serious statements, and I'm not going to sit here and let my 25 years of working where you've never gone to belittle my efforts because you're saying you're trying to lecture to us. How do we win races in New York? But you are in no position because you never ran for office here. So therefore, you ran for office in Guyana, which is a totally different ball game. And when you ran, you got 1% of the vote. I got 2 district leader wins and 50%, 49.5% to be a state senator. You have not even entered the temple in which we have won those races and which we fought. So I'm not going to allow you or anybody else to
not going anywhere. So if the two of you can, please just.
Don't knock the people.
We don't knock anybody. You went to 40 homes.
All the time you're
we go to all the homes.
How you get the word apathetic? People are not apathetic. It's up to the leaders to motivate them.
But they voted us in.
I was over here. When Shirley ran, I was over here.
Shirley, why don't you run?
To the people.
You run and see what you'll get.
What's that?
That's Shirley Chisholm. Why don't you run? You probably got the same 1% you got in Guyana or less.
What's that?
Because nobody's knocking the voters here. We stand up for them.
We have a system
Devin,
of
if you could
proportional
please
representation. And therefore,
sir, you're in no position to lecture us about politics.
What is your system? And then you work with that system. Don't whine, man.
Nobody's whining.
You're whining.
Rousseff was merely telling you the problems he has faced. I've agreed with him.
No wonder they scoff at you in Guyana or over here.
Guys,
you see, you're getting very personal now.
You're getting personal.
You should be ashamed to say stuff like that.
Devin, if you could cut to a...
I don't know if you have a preset agenda to come to attack me. I'm not going to sit there and let you with a 2% vote in Guyana come and tell me how to run for office. I am the person who has been a godfather and a trailblazer in this community. And I'm not going to allow you, who has never run for office, to teach me or Rousseff anything. And denigrate us in any way, say we scoff at people. Those are the issues we have fought. We have gone door to door. We have won elections. I am the elected district leader, the highest ranking Indo-Caribbean in New York. So you, whenever people scoff like you claim, you should tell them that. I, Albert Baldi, I'm the only elected person and the person who almost defeated a state senator. And those are enough qualifications to put me at the top of the list in this diaspora.
Okay, Mr. Baldi, you finished? Mr. Dev, there's no more response to that. We're going to move on. We're going to move on for that discussion.
It's just that his words were so narrow-minded, I wasn't going to allow that to fly. I'm not going to take any insult from him.
So if I can just jump in.
Next time for legal advice, I charge you.
For the sake of this discussion, we're just going to move on from that point.
I'm going to charge you a fee, Ravi, for legal consultation advice next time you come.
I'm a lawyer myself. You forgot that.
You consulted with me and you asked my legal advice. I'll charge you a fee next time because there's no love lost between us. You disappoint me the way you attack me, and I'm not going to allow you to do that.
This is not helping anybody right now because this is disgraceful.
Let's move on, Mr. Moderator, to ask him or close the mic down, and you can continue the conversation. Well, let's ask him to desist from such scurrilous and personal attacks.
I'm asking both of you to stop, and I would just say, Mr. Dev, you weren't helping the situation by, you antagonized even further when there was no point to do so, and I think that, you claim that myself and Mr. Baldi were belittling the community. I can say for myself there was no intent to belittle the community, but on the receiving end of some of your remarks, I do think there are attempts to belittle your fellow panelists, which is never a good idea here. But Deb, for the sake of this discussion, we'll move on. One of the things I said earlier that we wanted to address was the death of two important Guyanese figures, Prem Prasad and Rudy Nsanali. We do have a video ready of to pay tribute to former Ambassador Nsanali. So Devin, if you could please play that video. So yes, that video was in tribute to Rudy Nsanali, an icon of Guyanese politics and foreign policy for many years throughout his life, a distinguished diplomat. We extend our condolences to his loved ones, especially Benita Nsanali, his loving wife of many years. I can say I know my family, personal friends of the Nsanalis for many years. They were in fact at my first birthday party. So I have fond memories of the two of them and of Miss Benita Nsanali and the late Rudy Nsanali. And I personally extend my condolences, and I'm sure the entire Globespan team extends our condolences to the Nsanali family at this time. And I just wanted to offer our panelists a chance to reflect and offer their own sympathies on both Rudy Nsanali and Justice Prem Prasad. So we'll start with Mr. Haynes.
Yeah, like I was saying, I met Dr. Nsanali in Washington, D.C. at our Organization of American States. Before that, his reputation preceded him as being one of the model statesmen of Guyana diplomacy and international relations. He is to date, like the video said, he's the only person of Caribbean origin to ever chair or be the president of the United Nations. And I think that of itself spoke to his commitment. Even in his later years, he served as he was an ambassador. Then he served as the Minister of Foreign Affairs and International. Well, he served as Minister of Foreign Affairs because Dr. Henry Jeffrey was Minister of International Cooperation, and the two of them had a really good relationship. When I met them, I met both of them actually, and I could see that there was a bit of synergy between the two of them. Noted, when you meet someone of that caliber, of that great status and knowledge base, when you're with someone of that greatness because it's not what they say, it's just how they say it. I cannot remember what the conversation is, but I could tell you that whatever Dr. Nsanali told me, I found how he really explained it was very profound, and only people who have that kind of caliber and experience can portray that. I'm not very familiar with Prem Prasad, but as I said, I think that we don't do a lot of paying tribute to our fallen heroes. And you think about Dave Martin's song "Where Are the Heroes, Caribbean." You come to Washington D.C. Lincoln is there. It's probably one of the most iconic places to visit. Or across the water, you go see Jefferson, or you go to Mount Vernon and you see George Washington. But I think that one of the things from this is both in the diaspora and in Guyana, I think we have to work on a way, and we can help the folks in Guyana or our fellow Guyanese in honoring the life and legacy of these great people. It is very disheartening that the two fathers of Guyana, there is not even reputable statue or memorial for Dr. Jagan or LFS Bornham. I mean, you can have very much conflicting opinions of either one of them, but they're the ones that have gotten us independence. And I think that National Park should be renamed Independence Park. And I also think that they should be there, in that place. And not only them, but all the other presidents. We have to find a way, I think, and when I go around, even in my neighborhood, if there was someone who lived in this little corner of a street who did something, there is a memorial, a plaque, a plate, a park, a garden. And so I think that we can help in that area. I remember talking to a group of people recently, a few months ago, and their desires to do a project. And I was saying to them that, today, the way how we raise funds for projects is very different how it was done before. Before, we had these, and I don't mean to denigrate it anyway, but you had these cake sales, barbecues, etc. But I think today fundraising is taken a total different way. When I went to school, there are bricks, there are plaques, there are buildings that are named after people. So I think that in context of Guyana, I think this is an area where we can skill transfer and help our people to be able to honor these fallen people. And like I said, to their family, friends, and relatives, you have my deepest and greatest sympathy. But also, I would like to also just mention briefly that I think we are talking about some really important and complex issue, and albeit it should be in the vein of respect. I think we also have to try to help our fellow Guyanese understand where we live. We live in societies, whether it's England, Canada, UK, where there is institutions that are functioning. We live with some of the greatest infrastructure in the world, some of the most advanced science and technology. There's a methodology to everything. I recently was in Japan for a short while, and I was just waiting on the bus, and everyone is just lined up behind each other uniformly. And this is not planned. They do that in the escalator, they do it everywhere. And it just tells about the methodology of the people. And I mean, New York City has 8 million people, Albert and Rosat, all right? And needless to say, everybody can attest it's not the most cleanest place. The subways, the thing. Tokyo has 37 million people, get this. And every subway is extremely clean. Every train is extremely clean. There is no trash cans on the road as well. There is no littering. The reason why they moved the trash cans is they had a bomb in one of the trash cans. So now when you eat, you can walk with your stuff and take it and dispose of it. And one of the things I want to talk about here is just the mindset and mentality. So let's understand the development as well in context of both the diaspora and Guyana, where we live, is also mentally. I mentioned as well some of the things we had to overcome. Sometimes, folks may have a sort of a misconception about our environment where we live, but we've had to face discrimination, segregation. We've had to face numerous challenges, generalization, like I mentioned. And so I think it's important that we can try to explain to the people in Guyana, or fellow Guyanese rather, some of our challenges, where we come from, and then also we could segue into what our expectations are, because we want to be able to transfer some of the great things that we've learned into Guyana in the spirit of partnership.
Thank you very much, Mr. Haynes. Mr. Ravi, your thoughts on the passing of former Ambassador Insanali and Justice Prem.
Well, Ambassador Insanali is one of those great intellects that remained in Guyana and that made Guyana shine in the world stage. He came out of a whole cadre of individuals who, Ashley Jackson, you had Fred Wills, all of them were of eminent intellect, and they put their intellects to the service of Guyana, and we have to give them credit. They operated in a world that was vastly different from where we are now. So once again, for example, you have saber rattling going on from our western borders. This isn't anything new. Men like Insanali stood the test of time, were able to help in crafting policies where a small country like Guyana could punch way beyond its weight in the international arena, in the non-aligned movement of those days, to counteract Venezuela. We need men of his caliber to stand up, to be counted, both in Guyana and in the Guyanese diaspora. Justice Prem is a man whom I know from when I returned to Guyana. Having spoken, he came all the way to the west coast of Demerara to meet me. Very humble man. He was already a judge and articulated his concerns of what ailed the country. And from then on, it was a relationship that we continued, and he never, ever had any trace of arrogance in his blood. That's what I remember him mostly. His father-in-law, for what it's worth, is the founder of Prashad Nagar. He bought that piece of land and constructed that whole, what we would now call a suburb, from nothing. It was a fellow from Maikoni, but that's what intellect is, based on what you can do, and they did well. So I would like to offer my condolences to the relatives, to the family, to the friends of both of these two esteemed gentlemen on their passing, and I hope that they will continue in Prem's case. His son, Rishi, is also a judge of the High Court, and in fine fashion, he follows in his father's footsteps.
Thank you, Mr. Mr. Baldio. Your remarks on the passing of those two Guyanese titans.
As a proud Guyanese, who has always treasured my heritage and my history, and I've always treated all Guyanese as equals, I feel proud about these two individuals who have passed. And I'd also like to add one who passed just before them, Mr. Ashton Chase, as three luminaries, three legends who have left a deep imprint on Guyanese, wherever they may be. They will never try to separate or denigrate any class of Guyanese. These are all men way before their time. Mr. Insanali, his best work was done outside of Guyana, representing Guyana in the diplomatic field. And he was quite competent at doing that. He also had many of his great work is highly defined in many other works. Justice Prem was a man of the people. I knew him first as a magistrate. I had the honor of appearing before him in 1982 as a young prosecutor for the state, prosecuting a murder case. And in contrast to other judges who would actually not give any slack to a young lawyer or a lawyer in his first case, Justice Prem was very comforting. He sort of encouraged you along. And he brought to his profession a degree of humility and competence, and with no arrogance, that was quite refreshing. He was not somebody who pretended to be somebody that he's not, a pseudo-intellectual or an armchair politician, so to speak, or someone who knew was the final reservoir of all knowledge, an affliction that afflicts many. However, he was a man who was competent within his own skin, proud of who he was. His wife's family, of course, founded Chandra Nagar, where I still have my home. And also Ashton Chase was certainly one of the finest lawyers and leaders, labor leaders that Guyana has ever produced. I wanted to pay tribute to them because in the passage of time, such individuals have left a great imprint on Guyana. And they have developed it in whatever field, diplomacy, law, trade unionism, and all the great work that they have done. And they have never sought to denigrate others or put themselves above anyone else. They've always sought to be in that person's shoe. And they have never projected themselves into an area where they never had any experience in as to judge that person. And I think that that is their greatest asset that they have brought to bear. And such humility is hardly seen. They never had to make up for lack of a better word for their commonness by pretending to be who they're not. And I think that goes to their credit. I just wanted to emphasize, though, Mr. Moderator, with your permission, and I'm not going back to that conversation that I'd rather forget, but also one of the problems that we've had in running for office here, which few people realize, is that our districts are gerrymandered. They are cut up. They are sliced and diced. You have the district of Richmond Hill separated into 8 pieces. That in itself is the most fundamental problem in getting someone elected here. And that is what bothers us. That is the difficult hurdle you will find. And you will find when you run for office and you come out successful, as I came at 49.5% in winning almost a seat as large as Guyana in the state Senate here. They then cut me out of that district. And hence, I couldn't run again in that district, and they brought somebody else in. And I want to talk about the part that Brooklyn played in this. State Senator John Sampson, as he then was. We helped to get him elected as a state Senate majority leader, the first Guyanese to hold that position. That was due to the fact that we helped to give him that vote with the person we helped to get elected that a party favored. And we helped him to nominate him that if he didn't get the majority leadership, that we would stay into the race and hence the other parties would win. We engineered that. And this is highly technical politics that, you have to be in it to understand it, as Roosevelt said. You have to be in the arena. So I'm trying to break it down, that in doing that, he failed to help us. So it's not like we haven't been reaching out to other folks. It's just that other folks have not been reaching out to include us or to help us when they get to the throne. As a Senate majority leader, he could have helped an Indo-Guyanese to get elected, to break that impasse, Colin, and help his brothers to get into office. But I rather believe, and if you notice, there are always different sections and factions going to Guyana. One from Brooklyn, perhaps saying this government is illegal. One from another place, Georgia, saying this government is questionable. And one from Queens saying, no, everything is all, is righteous. It's democratic control. So those old wounds, which I don't subscribe to because I'm a Guyanese, born and bred, and I always treat all Guyanese equally. And that is why I hold, because I always say you are a true Guyanese. You never go down one side. As a matter of fact, I was born in Plaisance and grew up in Better Hope after the Civil War. So I'm going to Queens College. So I've been able to embrace the finest that Guyana has to offer. I will still be able to go back to Guyana and be welcomed. So there's always be, as the term is used, there'll always be scoffers, but that has never bothered folks, Colin, like ourselves, who are on a different path to a higher righteousness. Scoffers have never been part of what we should do. But getting back to the point here of talking about one of the problems of not getting one of us elected at that level, I'm the one who came the closest, and I've actually won that election. And here again, the powers that be manipulated the system to ensure when New York one declared to be the winner, they then took me off and said, oh no, you came 500 votes short. So that's another problem, gerrymandering, and also the problem with getting elected and staying elected.
Yeah, Ms. Wall, I don't want to interrupt you, but I'm being informed by Devin that we're running short on time. So I'm sorry to interrupt you there, but I want to make sure we wrap up the program timely. I'll give you all a chance to make your final closing remarks, and we'll come around back so each of you could just address what you want, and then we could end the program in a seamless way. So, Mr. Walters, since I cut you just now, I'll just give you now to make your final closing remarks.
No, I'd
on
rather
this
go last, if you don't mind.
Oh, okay. All right. And I'll just say some of the things that we would have addressed a bit if the program had gone on a bit differently is that we would have talked more about the treatment of the Guyanese diaspora once they're back in Guyana, and also, obviously this Guyana-Venezuela issue is a hot topic right now. We were talking about how the diaspora could have impacted that. So I don't know if anybody wants to include that in the closing remarks, but we'll just, closing remarks from everyone. I'll start with Mr. Ravi Dev.
Oh, I just want to, I guess, put what I've observed here. I meant my comments were meant in a positive sense when I said if politicians begin to define their constituents as apathetic, that is an insult, but because they're really, it's a failure of their failure. And I would say that in New York, just like every other individual who's been elected, actually been elected to office.
Just as a point of order, did anybody use that word apathetic?
They would have.
You get to respond to that. Just let Mr. Dave give his remarks, and then you'll respond to that.
What is needed? I would like to end my comments. Yeah. I think the community in Queens need representation. Their interests ought to be identified. And I think some political action committees should be formed to educate them. And I think it would give good results to those who want to get elected. I do believe also that the social groups that are there, for example, African Guyanese, African Caribbean people have a tradition of the church being involved. So in Brooklyn, when I came up here in '72, the church was very powerful in Crown Heights. And people like Shirley and others made good use of those fora to mobilize. And I would like to feel that our community has creative people, and I hope they would rise to the occasion to form these committees and form whatever vehicle it needs to mobilize the population.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dev. Mr. Colin Haynes.
One of our founding fathers said, united we stand, divided we fall. Today, all of us sitting here on this feed, and many people, whether you're in New York or London or Canada, or even in Blackbush Polder, Linden or Geldin or Lethem, we all have something in common. We're all Guyanese. Because one way or the other, some of us were taken away from Guyana or removed, whether it was voluntarily or involuntary. And some people, I think one thing we should have touched on is that not everyone in the diaspora has left voluntarily. A lot of folks have left involuntary. Some people have left just enough to save their lives. And so, they've moved on and so forth. But I think that we're scattered people. We love our home country. We want to see development happen. That is the dilemma. We come from very highly sophisticated environments, countries where attitudes and behaviors are totally different. Where crime is, even if crime is on the rampage, there is methodology to solve it. You can pick up the phone and call 911 and the police comes right around the corner. So systems and institutions work, whether it's in healthcare, agriculture, science, technology, or public safety, as I was just recognizing. But I think that what's also important is how do we help solve the problems of our home country, because we have that affinity that we want to see things get better, because we also realize that in our own home country, we don't have functioning institutions. We don't have a very robust education system. Our healthcare delivery is lacking in many instances. and we're far beyond the science and technological advancements that have defined countries. And so the diaspora can actually play a very good role in coming in partnership. When I say partnership, we're not coming to take away anything. I think Guyana, just being a country of 800,000 people, there's a lot for those living in there and those of us coming as well. We don't have 1 million people. The mark of development has to be more people. Even though we are the fastest and second fastest growing country in the world right now, we do need people. We do need people to come in to transfer skills, to share in the development of the country, to help promote better attitudes and behaviors. There is a very good book that I received by Dr. Lear Matthews, and he is one of the experts on this tension. He talks about this tension that the diaspora have, and then he talks about, both from leaving and involuntary or voluntary. I think it's a great book that you guys should look up and read as well. I'm sorry I don't have the name of the book, but I think that, yeah, there is one that binds us together. And after all, we all can attest to one people, one nation, one destiny. And I think that even though in the threat of Venezuela and the incursion and the potential threat that we're having, I think we need to realize that that is what binds us all together, that we're one people, whether we have many different races or constructs that were created for us. Myself, Albert, Rosat, Ravi, Dev, we're all one. We're one nation. We're a nation of 10 regions, almost 10 towns now, 3 counties, which we are fighting to defend one of them. And we have one destiny, to be able to see that Guyana develops into a better place, not for only ourselves, but for our family, our friends, and for our children to come. Thank you, guys. This has been a great discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Haynes. Mr. Bald, your
what you've seen here tonight, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, we're all one Guyanese and we love each other. What you've seen here tonight is the attempted lynching of the same thing that keeps us down as a nation. Where there's too many backbiters and too many folks who scoff at each other, the one trying to get up. In as much as you may have given your heart, your blood, sweat, and tears in achieving and cross thresholds, you will never or may never be given the respect, or you may never be given the appreciation that is your due. But I want to tell the young people out there that you must continue to fight. You continue to strive. You're never going to please everybody. You're going to be always people who are going to try to scoff at you. There's going to always be people who are going to try to talk down to you. There's always going to be people who can want to talk, who are going to say they can do better, or why didn't you do this? When you've already tried those things, let this be a lesson to you. You rise above it. You keep rising. Go beyond them. They themselves may have never even won a school board appointment. They may have even won 2% of the vote. But you, in your own way, can become the next president of the United States. You may become the next prime minister of Guyana. You may become the next president. Don't let somebody sit back and tell you what to do and what to achieve and how far it is and where you may have gone wrong. As Roosevelt said, where the strong man stumbled. You belong to a special class of triers and doers. Never let anybody pull you down. I'm one of those. When I was growing up, nobody ever gave me a chance that I'll become a lawyer or I'll become the only Guyanese elected twice, or they'll go after me and I'll come and rise again, like you talked about Jesus Christ rising again, or you talked about winning a state senate seat and setting a precedent, and none of them even understood that. These are the same people who don't even vote or have a vote. So brothers and sisters, always think positively, think on the right side, be on the right side of yourself, make your parents proud. Don't let anybody put you down. There's always going to be naysayers. There's always going to be detractors. And if you want to be successful, you've got to stick to your aim. And I have a special message to you, Rusat. I didn't use the term apathy or go down that line. All I was saying is that Guyanese folks in America go out and vote. There's no reason why you can't help Guyana, as we have been doing. We're the first person to call the White House. I spoke to the Secretary of State's people even today about Guyana. We spoke to the people in the White House about Guyana's problem with Venezuela, and still prepared for this show, and still be there to help, and still go door to door and ask for your vote where we don't need to. So those are us who have done the work, who have done and can speak and should be allowed to speak, instead of being lectured upon by those who have not even crossed the threshold or even entered the pathways that we have made. We don't have a pathway here. We have to build from scratch. So don't let's talk about the grass is greener or we left for greener pastures. The pastures in America are not green. As Colin, as you and I said, no, it's concrete. Just to use a metaphor, it's concrete, not grass is green. But we'll continue to fight. We'll continue to be patriotic. We don't have to be asked. We don't have to be begged. We will continue to help where we can. In as much as we don't get help from Guyana or we're looking for any position there, we will be there, the first to help. And Rosette, continue your good work, continue striving. You may not satisfy everybody. Those who criticize you may not even get 10% of what you've gotten. But at the same time, you have to have it in your heart. And you have to have the heart of a lion if you want to succeed. You see that man there, Cherry Jagan and Mahatma Gandhi behind me? Let them be your inspirational guides. Or Barack Obama. That's why I have I live in their photographic presence, because these are the men that inspire me. Those are the men who should inspire you. And wherever you come from Guyana, even if you come from the last part of Guyana, it doesn't mean you cannot rise to the top. That is my advice to you. Never let anybody keep you down. Guyana is not for the privileged only. It's for everyone, every Guyanese of whatever race or heritage. And I stand with you. I'm a proud Guyanese. I love Guyana. I'm a patriot. And that is why I've always stood up for Guyana at the highest levels, not in coffee room discussions, not in backdoor commentaries, not in backroom talk, or not in languishing intellectual, pseudo-intellectual chairs. I'm a man of action. I walk the streets, and that is totally where I am. And if this is scuff, I am always going to be a fighter. And thank you very much, gentlemen. Let's keep on scuffing. Remember that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Baldio, for your contributions tonight. Now we are ending the program, and I thank you all for all of your remarks. I just on a closing note, I'd say I think for the most part we had a respectful discussion, other than there was that brief moment there. And the reason that I just want to address that before we close is, Mr. Baldio used the word just now about setting a precedent. Right, that he had tried to set a precedent many years ago when he nearly won that state Senate seat. And there are many things in life where we set a precedent. And I think one of the things Mr. Nohar Singh wanted to do with this show, and one of the things that I want to do in my participation in the show, is set a precedent for how we, as a Guyanese community, whether in Guyana or in America, discuss politics. I think one of the reasons there is, the word apathy, for the record, came into the discussion because I was quoting Dr. Tara Singh's analysis, and that's where the word came from. And then I expanded upon it because I thought that the word was appropriate. But that is where it came from, as a matter of fact. I didn't want to interrupt Mr. Dev earlier, but that's where the word came from in this discussion. But the reason that there will be this sort of apathy, and I will use the word myself, is you have a lot of people who look at the way the Guyanese discuss politics and say, oh, them two men a fight. Oh, it's nasty. I don't want to get involved in that type of stuff. Mm-hmm. And when they see things like what happened tonight, they're not going to look at the hour-and-a-half discussion that we had. They're going to look at those 5 minutes, and they're going to say, you see that? That's what I mean I get involved in politics. Mm. And that is what we have to be conscious of and think about. And I know both Mr. Dev and Mr. Baldio are better than those 5 minutes that we saw there. You guys are very distinguished gentlemen, have very long careers, very intellectual individuals. But unfortunately, when we do have those moments like that, that causes more harm than good in our community. And I'm not just talking about the two of you. This is something that's gone on for years. And that's why, Mr. Dev, in your remarks where you talk about the two of us, one of the reasons I say that the word apathy is appropriate is this is something that has been going on for years. This is not just about Albert Baldi or Rusad Ramgopal. The article from the New York Times was written in 1996. This is something that has been going on in this community for years. And when it goes on across generations, across eras, you can't just say it's about the respective individuals who've run. There is something larger that has to be discussed, and that's what I was trying to talk about tonight. And there was no attempt to belittle anyone. But you have to have an open discussion. You have to be able to roar about the issues and talk about the issues openly if they're ever going to be addressed. Because if you're afraid, oh, you may offend somebody, and therefore you're not going to talk about it, then it'll never be addressed. So that's why we talked about those issues, but there was no intention to belittle anyone. We don't want to belittle. We want to uplift the community. But in order to uplift the community, you have to address what you see as the flaws. If you don't talk about it, you're never going to address it. Now, just a few final things I want to say. So
sorry, Rusat.
Yeah.
We really have to close now.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, we did go over time, but just one final thing, Devin, just to correct the record, because something was said about with respect to me when Mr. Dev was talking, and just like how I believe you had the best intentions when you were saying it, but you shouldn't assume that certain things were done or not done in someone's campaign. We did all those things, and when it comes to canvassing, we canvassed over 20,000 doors. We knocked over 20,000 doors ourselves. We texted 60,000 people, and we handed out tens of thousands of flyers. And we talk about petitions. You mentioned petitions that were done over here with regards to Guyanese politics, but we did petitions our own. That's how you get on the ballot in the first place. And we got on 2 ballot lines, something that no Guyanese American had ever done. So we did all those things and much more. But yet we came up short, and there are reasons that we talk about why we come up short. But nobody was trying to belittle anyone. And I don't think you should assume that somebody did or didn't do something, because as the old saying goes, when you assume, you make out of both you and me. And I think we saw a bit of that tonight. But I just want to wrap up those points. And I'm sorry, Devin, I know we did go over time. So thank you all for your contributions tonight. Take care. And I hope our audience was both entertained and informed. And good night to everyone.
Good night.